Today, the Hub has the privilege of interviewing Dr. Joshua Matanzima. Dr. Matanzima is currently a research officer at the Center for Social Responsibility in Mining, which falls under the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland. He's also a research associate with the Department of Sociology at Rhodes University in South Africa. And he has written extensively about Lake Kariba, having been born in the area in Zimbabwe. Most recently, he published quite a significant book about waterscapes in Lake Kariba, looking at the materiality of Lake Kariba, questions around belonging, and so forth. So today we'd like to discuss with Dr. Matanzima one particular issue which has interested him in terms of his research and publications, namely human-wildlife conflict at Lake Kariba. So welcome, Dr. Matanzima. Thank you so much for joining us for this interview.
Thank you for having me.
So given we have an audience which may not be particularly familiar with Zimbabwe, more generally speaking, or even more specifically, Lake Kariba, before we get on to the causes and the character and the consequences of human-wildlife conflict at Lake Kariba, perhaps you could give us some ideas to the history, the very formation of Lake Kariba, now over 50 years ago, or approximately 50 years ago, and developments since then, which are particularly pertinent when it comes to questions around human and wildlife conflict. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Kik, for the invitation to this interesting conversation to discuss this interesting topic. Yes, as you have said, I was born and bred in communities around Lake Kariba. So I grew up in Kariba town, and this has interested me in doing my research, focusing on the Lake Kariba and communities surrounding it, specifically looking at how these communities interact with the lake. So the Lake Kariba was constructed in 1958 at the Kariba Gorge. So the Kariba Gorge is right at the border of Zimbabwe and Zambia. The reason why Lake Kariba was constructed along the Zambezi River is because of the electricity generation. But since then, you'd find that the lake has attracted so many industries, including fisheries, tourism, conservation, wildlife trade, and so many other socio-economic activities that are happening at Lake Kariba. So because of these activities that have been happening since the dam was constructed, we have seen a growing number of people from other areas, like in southern parts of Zimbabwe, eastern parts of Zimbabwe, western parts of Zimbabwe, coming into the area to engage in these activities for livelihood. And this is increased in recent years when the economy in Zimbabwe has not been functioning quite well. People have no jobs. People don't have, livelihoods and other things to survive on. So what we have seen is people coming to Lake Kariba to engage in fishing, to engage in cross-border trade, to engage in poaching and other things like that at Lake Kariba and the surrounding environs. And of course, some of these activities that they are engaging in are legal, but some of the activities are illegal. So that's what's happening at Lake Kariba now. It's no longer a place where you have only the Tonga people who were living there before the dam was constructed, but we do have many people coming in and out today. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you so much. I've had the opportunity of reading some of your work on Lake Kariba in relation to human-wildlife conflict, and there's maybe two issues which you can integrate into your responses to the specific questions I'm raising. The two issues, one about that perhaps it's more appropriate to speak about human conflict than human-wildlife conflict, and also maybe to give a sense of the difference between the conflicts taking place in Kariba town itself and then along the banks of the shores of Lake Kariba. But let's just start with the question of causes, or the conditions which lead to this conflict. Are these quite diverse forms of causes which lead to human wildlife conflict?
All right, thank you so much for your question. So human wildlife conflict is something that has characterized this region since the lake, or even before the lake was constructed. There were human wildlife conflicts along the Zambezi River, because, like I mentioned, there were Tonga people and Shangwe people who were living on both sides of the river, interacting with the Zambezi River on daily basis. And the Zambezi River was inhabited by crocodiles, hippos, snakes, and also there were other terrestrial animals that were visiting the valley to drink water and also interacting with human beings. We've got elephants, we've got lions, we've got hyenas that were also interacting with people even before the dam was constructed. But during this time, when the dam was not constructed, people do say that conflicts were there, but they were not defining these interactions as only conflict. They were also looking at these interactions as coexistence as well, because they used to benefit quite a lot from these animals in terms of like socio-economically, for ritual purposes, for subsistence and other things like that. So they really valued the animals, even though there were conflicts. And also during that time in the Zambezi Valley, people had devised ways to interact with these animals, to like safety precautions and other different methods to protect themselves from being attacked by animals. I just want to give an example. If you look at the pictures that were taken by Thea Skada and Elizabeth Coulson, who did like a foundational field work in these regions before the dam was constructed, you would see that the Tonga people used to have what they call dara, like story huts, in the fields along the Zambezi River. So those story huts were a human wildlife conflict prevention method, so that when animals come, like hyenas and buffaloes and lions, they couldn't attack people, because people would be sleeping on story huts along the Zambezi River. So that was one of the methods that was being used by people to protect themselves from attacks from animals. But when the dam was constructed, people had to be displaced from these environs, like from the Zambezi River, where they had established some kind of coexistence with animals, and then had to be placed in further regions, like in the uplands, where you would also find animals, and people didn't have, people were not used to that landscape, and they had to adjust to that landscape over time. But for them to adjust to that landscape, it was kind of difficult, because the area was very isolated, very remote, very bushy, and it became very difficult for them to devise ways to protect themselves from animals. So what we saw after displacement was an increase in the number of people being killed by wildlife in the resettlement areas, in such areas as present-day Msambakaruma, present-day Mola, and present-day Binga. So if you want to understand the occurrence of human wildlife conflict in the Zambezi Valley, you really need to look at what was happening before the Kariba Dam, when there was more of coexistence than conflict. And today what we see is more of conflict than coexistence. And people today actually mention that these changes that have been happening is because of the Kariba Dam and the difficulties in adapting to new landscapes, try and devise new methods of prevention Yeah, so that's a little bit of a background about the human-wildlife conflicts in at Lake Kariba. And also the other thing that I wanted to mention was about the term itself, human-wildlife conflict.
Yeah.
So, like I said, in the past, people had more of a coexistence than conflict, but now we have more of conflict than coexistence. This is because the human-wildlife interactions have only been looked at by researchers, mainly anthropologists, human geographers, biologists, as only negative. And
Yeah.
they have not yet well, some of the researchers have started looking at the positive interactions that also happen during these interactions. So we have got growing scholarship on positive interactions as well today. But in the past, researchers were mainly focusing on the negative interactions, but um, they were trying to blur the positive side of these interactions. So this is why you find that the terms like human-wildlife conflict are no longer. I mean, some of the scholars are now diverting from the use of the term human-wildlife conflict because it blurs the positive side of things, the coexistence
Okay.
side of things. So nowadays, the acceptable phrase that is being used is negative interactions between people and animals so that we don't blur the positive side of things.
Okay.
And also, sometimes you notice that most of the papers that were published in the 1990s, in the 2000s, and the first half of the 2010s were focusing on human-wildlife conflicts. Oh no, we're focusing on human. Yes, we're focusing on human-wildlife conflicts, but a recent study that was carried out by a team from India and University College London found out that most of those scholars or papers that were published at that time had the title Human-Wildlife Conflict. But if you actually read what's inside the text, were human conflicts about
Yeah.
wildlife. So this is a
Okay.
scenario where people, like different stakeholders, like communities, um, conservationists, national parks authorities, government agencies are conflicting about the
Yeah.
management and use of wildlife. So they have also been trying to distinguish between human-wildlife conflict and human conflicts about wildlife. So that's another
Mm.
um,
Okay.
development that has been happening recently. So at the same time, at Kariba, we also have situations that are human-wildlife conflicts, and we also have situations that are human conflicts about wildlife. So it's very
Yeah.
important to distinguish these dimensions so that sometimes
Okay.
we try to solve human-wildlife, we try to solve human-wildlife conflicts using using methods that can be used to solve human conflicts about wildlife or vice versa. So
Okay.
this whole emphasis on distinguishing the two is because uh, scientists are now emphasizing the need to identify appropriate solutions for the appropriate problem.
Yeah. Okay. Now, thank you very much for that, Joshua. So you've discussed the broad causes and conditions of contextualizing the emergence and development of conflict. If you could give us a sense of the form or characteristics these take, I mean, are there certain conflicts in relation to particular categories of people in and around Kariba who are experiencing these conflicts? If you could give us a few examples just to give us a sense of what you're talking about more specifically.
All right, thank you so much. I just gonna add a little bit before I move to
Yeah,
that question. So, in terms of causes, today we have got a number of causes of these negative interactions between people and animals at Lake Kariba. So we do have economic causes, we have social cultural causes, and we've got ecological causes.
Yeah.
So in terms of the economic, like I mentioned before, we have a situation whereby statistics are suggesting that probably 90%, over 90% of people in Zimbabwe are unemployed. And we do have people, particularly the youths from other regions, coming into Lake Kariba to survive on fishing, to engage in cross-border trade and many other activities. And this is why you find out that the population in Kariba town is growing, and even that of the fishing camps and fishing villages is growing. You go to, for example, the Gache Gache fishing villages. There are only 150 permit holders
Yeah.
who are supposed to be fishing in the lake. But if you count the number of the people who are fishing and who are living within that village, it has gone way beyond 150. It's doubling that number.
Okay.
So that tells you that we've got a lot of people coming in to into this region for livelihood. And what's happening now is that we have so many activities on the lake shore, and
Yeah.
some of the areas that these people are fishing are breeding areas for fish, where you also find a high concentration of crocodiles. And this is the reason why you
Okay.
see people being attacked within those areas, because they can't go into like designated fishing areas, because once they go in
Yeah.
there without a permit and they are caught by the national parks, then they get arrested. So what they do, they fish in undesignated areas like fish breeding grounds, where there are
Mhm.
crocodiles, and they get attacked by crocodiles. And if you look at the majority of crocodile attacks that are happening today, it's because they are happening in areas where there's a high concentration of crocodiles, especially in breeding areas. And also the other thing that I noticed in Kariba town is that we have so many human activities happening on the lake shore. And in the past, you would find that these crocodiles and hippos and other predators would prey on other wildlife, terrestrial wildlife like impalas that would come and drink water from the lake. But that's not happening anymore. Like, other animals are not encroaching the lake anymore. All you find is human beings, and that leaves crocodiles to only prey on humans. That's the reason why
Okay.
we have so many escalating cases happening, especially in Kariba town. It's about the
Yeah.
population growth, increased anthropogenic activities along the lakeshore, which disrupts the ecosystem and results in people being attacked, and not other animals that visit the lake for water. And also in terms of socio-cultural, we have issues like witchcraft beliefs, especially in the villages, fishing villages. So sometimes witches are being like crocodiles. So the witches are believed to move in the form of crocodiles to attack their enemies. So that those beliefs are quite prominent, especially if you go into the fishing villages.
Mhm.
And if there is a crocodile that is identifiable and is behaving in unusual ways in a particular bay, that crocodile is mostly described in it's mostly identified as a kind of a witch crocodile, which is being
Mhm.
sent by witches to attack enemies or behave in the ways that it would be behaving. So, for example, in Gache Gache, we had a place called um, Machen Bay. So this area was nicknamed Machen Bay because there was a crocodile that was only attacking men, and once it attacks men, it would only eat genital parts and leave the entire body. So, and then the genital parts are locally known as Machen. So that entire area, because people who were killed within that area, dozens of people were killed, were only the crocodile would only eat the genital parts. So that made the entire bay to be nicknamed Machen Bay. And we also have another situation in Fothergill. There was another crocodile which was named Mutumba. It was extraordinarily large. So each time it was only attacking fishermen when they were coming back and not going into the lake. And people, termed it Mutumba because of its large size. And each time they called the National Parks authorities to come and come and shoot the crocodile, it could not be found. Once they leave, then you see it, and then also people started saying that, oh no, it's mysterious, and then it was being associated with all sort of sorcery and witchcraft and other things like that within that area. So this happens quite a lot in all the bays, like from Basin 1 to Basin 5, where there are communities and where you find any crocodile that's behaving in an unusual ways. It's there are always witchcraft connotations, spiritual connotations. I'm not the only one who have found this. Even Joanne McGregor, in her studies in the early 2000s, she also found the same in Binga, where communities living there were also ascribing spiritual connotations to particular behaviors of crocodiles.
Okay.
Yes. And then apart from social-cultural causes, we also have ecological causes. Like, for example, today we've got climate change. And there's a lot of, like the water has been dropping in Lake Kariba.
Yeah.
Like in 2015, it dropped up to 13%. And then recently in 2023, it dropped down to 12% usable storage for electricity generation. So this is not the total amount of water in the lake. It's just the drop in the usable storage for electricity generation. So that was at 12%. And if it goes down to 12%, then it means that most of the areas where fish, like fish breeding spaces, they dwindle. And once they dwindle, crocodiles will have, because crocodiles, they feed on fish. So if there's, if there's the fish breeding dwindles, then that means crocodiles won't have food in the lake. So they'll end up preying on people and other big game out of the lake. So that also explains why we have got so many human wildlife conflict activities happening in the Lake Kariba. It's also the same with what's happening not only with aquatic animals but also with terrestrial animals. We have baboons coming in, we have elephants coming into communities, we've got zebras coming into communities to for food. It's like their livelihoods are among the people, because in the bush they won't have food. There's not enough food because of the dryness, because of the drought. So they end up encroaching human communities in search of food, like grazing on people's lawns, grazing on people's gardens, and other things like that. So it's not just only what's happening in the lake, but also it also explains the situation outside the lake with human encounters with terrestrial animals as well. And yes, and also, in terms of cause, so by virtue of explaining these causes, we also get to understand the cause or the character of human wildlife conflict at Lake Kariba. So as I mentioned, people are not only conflicting with aquatic animals, but they're also conflicting with terrestrial animals like elephants and the buffaloes and lions and hyenas. If you go into other communities, like especially rural communities that are along the lake in Mola and Binga, you hear cases of people being killed by lions, hyenas, and elephants, or even these predators like lions and hyenas preying on people's livestock like goats and cattle. So those are also some of the dimensions that are happening outside the lake itself. And to make matters worse, these terrestrial incidents are also, interpreted through socio-cultural lens, also through economic lens, and and ecological lens, as well as I've explained just now. And to say something about the economic causes, the economic cause or causes of these conflicts, the people that are coming to Lake Kariba for fishing from other areas, they don't only engage in illicit fishing, but they also become poachers, uh, engaging in illegal wildlife trade, engaging in a lot of smuggling of game meat into Zambia and other parts of Southern Africa. So all those activities are described as human wildlife conflict. So it's not only a matter of animals attacking people, but it's also a matter of people attacking animals through poaching, like I've just described, and also through a lot of what you call like people using lethal methods to deal with problem animals in their communities. And this normally happens when they report a case about a problem animal to the national parks and or any other conservation body that's within their area, and then they don't get any response. So they'll end up using lethal methods to deal with these problem animals. And if you go into communities today in Kariba town and Kariba rural and Binga, you will hear of many stories of animals being killed by people within the villages, within their homesteads, because people will try to protect themselves, especially if when they don't get any response from the authorities. And I've been privileged to interview, the national parks authorities in Zimbabwe, especially at Lake Kariba, and they have told me a lot. I mean, about the reasons why they sometimes don't respond to these reports in these communities. So key to this to these reasons has been economic hardships. So sometimes they don't have fuel, sometimes they don't have vehicles to go into these communities, to go into these remotest communities in Kariba rural to deal with these problem animals. So that's the reason why sometimes they don't respond, and you end up having people killing animals in the name of retaliation.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that very extended discussion. Just a couple of questions in relation to what you've mentioned, whether I think in the case of Kariba town itself, is there some class-based distinction between humans and wildlife in terms of wildlife encroaching on people's property? Is there sort of a class distinction there? And then secondly, given that genders often, so that fishing practices are often very gendered in character, are there any differences in the experiences that men and women have as fishermen or fishing women in relationship to interactions and conflict with animals while fishing, particularly whether it's on the shore or on the boats on the lake itself?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. In terms of class, I wrote a paper about human conflicts over wildlife in Kariba town, which actually demonstrates the class distinctions in terms of, human wildlife attitudes towards animals in Kariba town. So Kariba town is inhabited by different people from different classes. So we have upper middle class, and then we have lower class. So these communities, they they're kind of different in the sense that where upper class live, like their suburbs, they are kind of gated communities where wild animals wouldn't get into their properties and cause any destruction or attack human beings. And if you go into those areas, people living there do not, well, of course, they would be affected by animals in some way, but their interactions with animals is more positive than negative. But if you come to the people who are living in like low class people who are living in high density suburbs, and they are very close to the game corridors, they are very close to the lake, you would find that these people are experiencing a lot of wildlife encroachment into their homes more than the people who are living in upper class. And that's where, so when I did this research, I wanted to understand the attitudes between these two classes of people. So if you go into these this these high density suburbs like Nyamunga, like Maombekombe, like Batonga, people have got pretty much negative attitudes towards wild animals because of the experiences that they have with animals, like attacks every day, like animals encroaching their homesteads, destroying property, impacting on their livelihoods, and many other things like that. But if you go into the low density suburbs like Baobab, like Heights, this is the like upper class where you find mostly white people and also black people, and who have got money, and they afford to have to fence their communities so that animals do not encroach into their properties. So they do actually have a positive attitudes towards animals, and they would want to see them protected. So there's this conflict that happens between the upper class and lower class about how animals should be managed within the area, within Kariba town itself. This is because of the different experiences that they have with animals. So at one point, I interviewed one lady. So she's from Europe, but she migrated into Lake Kariba. So she's into fishing, and her property is close to Lake Kariba within the low density suburbs. So within that area, boys from high density suburbs, like young boys, they come to her area chasing elephants with dogs. So at one day, she tried to stop those boys from chasing the elephants with dogs, and then the boys had to say, no, these are our animals. Go back to Europe, and all those racist language, because of the differences in the ways in which people see animals and the ways in which they would want to see animals being managed in the area.
Yeah.
And in terms of gender, so I wrote a paper with the former acting director of the University of Zimbabwe Lake Kariba Research Station, Professor Nwatiwa, when we were looking at the experiences of women at Lake Kariba, and we found that women would use what we call passive methods of fishing, where they are sitting outside the lake, sitting on their buckets and using rod and lines. And whilst men would get into the lake up to the breast level, and also engaging in what they call locally um, jigging, and that exposes them to attacks from hippos and crocodiles in the lake. And most of the cases that you hear about men being attacked, it's because they would be using this form of fishing, and that's the reason why you see that most of the cases that are happening in the lake, in terms of attacks from hippos and crocodiles, it's mostly men that are being attacked than women. And also, the other thing that men are doing at Lake Kariba is venturing into the lake in the middle of the night when crocodiles and hippos are highly active.
Yeah.
So the reason why they are encroaching the lake at night is because they want to engage in illegal activities, as I've mentioned before, poaching of fish, illegal fishing, and illegal cross-border trade in the middle of the night. So this is when hippos and crocodiles are highly active, and this is the reason why they are mostly attacked by these highly active predators at night. It's the same time when elephants are also very highly active, even on land, like terrestrial animals, like these dangerous terrestrial animals like hyenas, lions, and elephants. They also become very active at night. So this is the reason why you find these people, men mostly, being attacked by these predators than women. It's all about, women doing passive activities and
Sure.
men doing very risky activities in and around Lake Kariba.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Joshua. Maybe we can just end off by discussing just the overall effects and consequences of this conflict, and also at the same time, your thoughts on how not necessarily the conflict can be resolved, but how there might be ways and means of trying to minimize or limit the conflict to the benefits of hopefully the animals themselves and not just the humans. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of effects, um, we see injuries. I was born in Kariba. I've got friends who were injured by crocodiles. I've got relatives who were also injured by crocodiles. As we speak today, they are surviving on, like you'd find somebody with one leg, somebody with one eye, and this is because they were victims of human wildlife conflict. And I also have interviewed many victims of human wildlife conflict in the rural areas of Sampakaruma, of Mola, and Binga as well. I've interviewed people who were impacted, and these people have negative attitudes towards animals. But sometimes, if you interview people who were victims, and even some who were not victims, they would have positive attitudes towards animals. So it's not only a matter of of being a victim that you become negative about or towards an animal. You can be a victim and still hold positive attitudes towards an animal. This also depends on the severity of the injury or of the destruction that one incurred during a conflict. Uh, and we also have so many reports of people dying from human wildlife conflicts. People are dying every day. Like just last week, 2 weeks ago, I guess I believe it's 2 weeks ago, in Kariba town only, there were two people who were killed by elephants within 1 week. And then we also have a lady from Kwari in Kariba town who was also injured by a hyena while she was sleeping in a homestead during the day. So these are the cases where you see that it's not just injuries, but people are also losing their lives. And this is why, because once people start losing their lives, then communities become angry towards the animals themselves, but not just the animals, even the authorities who are supposed to protect the people from these animals. So you end up having human wildlife conflicts that escalate into human conflicts about what animals are doing to people. So yeah. And also there are cases of people's properties being destroyed by animals. So in the lake, you would see that like fishing gear is also destroyed by crocodiles, by hippos. Once a crocodile and a hippo walk into an area where fishing nets are laid, then that would mean that those nets will be destroyed. And people always complain about their nets being destroyed in fishing camps and fishing villages. And also sometimes boats are being destroyed by hippos. And this is also a source of anger within the communities because sometimes people don't have money to repair or to repair those losses incurred in the lake. And also not just in the lake, but you also have destruction of property in people's homesteads, in people's villages, in rural areas in Kariba town. When an elephant gets into somebody's yard, then it destroys the entire garden. It tramples on the entire garden. We have, Drika also encroaching people's fields in rural areas, people's gardens in Kariba town, also causing a lot of problems, trampling on people's crops, and and people are always complaining about where they would get, because most of the people in rural areas in Zimbabwe today, they get donations from the government, like seeds in the form of seeds. So once you get your seeds, you won't get the seeds the second time. So once you plant those seeds and they're trampled on by elephants or duiker or buffaloes, then
Yeah.
you've suffered heavy losses. You won't get any compensation or from those incidents. So it's quite unfortunate what people are experiencing at Lake Kariba, and for
Yeah.
sure nothing is being done at the moment in terms of solving this problem. It's actually escalating. And if you, like I mentioned at the start of this conversation, was that uh, the authorities are saying that they can't respond effectively because of the economic hardships. Sometimes they are told of a problem elephant in a certain area, and then they have to kind of gather resources, to go into that area and solve the problem. But by the time they get into that area, the elephant would have caused so many problems, injure people,
Yeah.
destroy homes and gardens. So it's not a problem that can be solved in the current economic situation, that can be easily solved in the current economic situation in Zimbabwe. So things need to
Yeah.
improve in terms of, economically, so that these authorities have adequate resources to respond to problem animal reports at Lake Kariba.
Sure.
And also, with these economic hardships, it's also difficult to solve the problem because people need to survive. And it so you can't say don't do fishing, don't do this, because that's the livelihood, that's how people
Yeah.
are surviving. So they will end up doing it, risking their lives even if it's dangerous, but they have to survive, so they will just end up
Yeah.
doing it. So it becomes kind of a catch-22 situation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thanks, Joshua. Are there before we close officially, anything else that you'd like to raise, which you think is quite critical to these conflicts that we have not mentioned already?
Yeah, I would like to encourage listeners to, especially academics who are into research about the interactions between people and the environment, to consider seriously doing more research on human wildlife conflicts and human conflicts about wildlife and any other interactions that are happening in different parts of Africa, because there are so many areas where these conflicts are happening, not just in Kariba, but elsewhere in Southern
Yeah.
Africa. But we know little about those incidents. We know little about those cases. So we really need more information to ensure that it's kind of regional level or continental level, we develop, sound or robust policies that can help us mitigate these problems. And also, the other thing that I wanted to suggest was that governments, not just in Zimbabwe, but elsewhere in Africa where these conflicts are happening, can also try to mobilize resources for the authorities to ensure that they respond to problem animals effectively and efficiently. Because at the moment, we see that these authorities are struggling to solve this problem because of the economic problems that are happening. And then the other thing that I would like to encourage, academics, government agencies, and other NGOs is the need to incorporate the socio-cultural dimension into the management of wildlife, because it's one dimension that we don't see being included in the discussion surrounding solving human wildlife conflict, mitigating human wildlife conflict, or managing wildlife. So it's very important to also incorporate these social cultural issues that I've just mentioned. Uh, they would help a lot in terms of successfully mitigating these problems. Otherwise, if we just focus on the tangibles, the economics, the ecological aspects of it, then we are not solving the entire problem. So it's best we also incorporate social cultural issues. I think that's all I wanted to say about
Okay.
recommendations. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Joshua, so much for this conversation. I encourage our readers to Google your work and to read as much as they can and find out more about human wildlife conflict at Lake Kariba and about Lake Kariba more generally. And I look forward to your further work on Lake Kariba as well. Thank you so much, Joshua. Have a great day.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day. You too.
Take care. Bye-bye.